Drip, drip, drip. Hi, everybody. Harry here to talk about three new stories involving Jeffrey Epstein and essentially the administration's foiled efforts to put it all behind them. I think the biggest and most interesting is that we have learned first that when Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche went down to Florida to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, completely crazy, completely inappropriate, they made an audio recording of the interview. So that might suggest, as has been reported, that there wasn't an agent there, which is a violation of prosecutorial tactics 101. You might need another witness. You have to produce an official report. So very purposely and cunningly, Blanche didn't do that, but instead made an audio recording. So, which would have been lunacy not to, in case you ever have to show, you can imagine in the absence of any recording, people having all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories about what Maxwell told Blanche. As I said, the whole thing completely illegitimate, no public interest reason. In fact, in doing this, we had Trump say yesterday something like, he just wanted, I think, to get a sense of what was going on. I haven't spoken about it. He's a very talented guy, Todd Blanche. And I think he probably wanted to know, just to get a feeling of it. Think about that for 10 seconds and whether you discern in that mission anything that a deputy attorney general ought to be doing in the service to the people and the enforcement of the laws, which is their only job. Okay, but now the pressure has stayed strong enough that at least the current story is they're thinking seriously about releasing the whole transcript of this interview, which does suggest that at a minimum, he got her, did Blanche, and of course she knew she was playing ball with him, to say some good stuff, overall favorable to Trump stuff, maybe overall shading the truth stuff, overall saying things that are less inculpatory, or as our podcast title would have it this week, skeevy, than the many reports now emerging from Epstein's ex-girlfriend and Epstein's brother and some of the victims that have Trump really front and center as a kind of wingman and homie of the words that have been bandied about of Epstein. But anyway, now I think the pressure just continues to mount, and they're thinking now in more, there's obviously conflict within the White House, because in this report, there are three officials, and one says, it wouldn't come out for weeks. Two said it would come out right away. What that reflects pretty clearly to me is the regular dispute in a scandal between the people who seem always to be proven right again and again, who say, get everything out there and get it out immediately rather than the drip. And those who, just say in a given situation, if we get it out there, we're going to look terrible. And of course here, the White House, very much has the possibility of withholding everything, including the FBI files, the 300 gigabytes of files that the House Oversight Committee has now subpoenaed. I'll get back to that in a moment. But there's apparently, really active discussion to release that transcript, to do it sooner rather than later. Even if Maxwell says some good stuff, I think it would be really taken with a grain of salt, and we'll certainly see Blanche doing some what the trial lawyers would call leading of the witness, which you're not supposed to do. So I think it's going to be, at best, fairly ugly if they release it. But they're now in quicksand, and they just keep getting deeper and deeper into quicksand. So they're thinking, if we're going to have to do this in 4 weeks, let's just, suck it up and do it now. Okay, so revelation that he did an audio tape, but how could he not have? But that he did it suggests no FBI person, no AUSA, no FBI 302, the term for a report on what was said. So really amplifies how anomalous and sort of political the whole mission was. And the other big point in these reports is we don't know what senior officials are talking, but we know they're not the decision makers because they say, we're not talking. Who would it be? Trump. I don't even know if Bondi is in on these sorts of things, but Trump, Blanche, maybe if Beauvais hasn't taken his oath of office yet, Stephen Miller, the real brain trust. So what we have are fairly high up, but people who don't really do the political damage control, it seems to me, in the White House, and aren't the ones who repeatedly greenlight actions that are just either illegal, abnormal, or whatever, but always with Donald Trump's political fortunes in mind. So the story is a little bit contrived by the people who report it. That's how stories work. But they're basically saying they're really considering it. I think they probably are really considering it, but the decision would be made really at the top level. And that's not who's really considering it and not what the story is. So stay tuned on that. But the fact that I'm thinking maybe we have to do it and sooner rather than later means they are hunkered down in a real scandal mode with conflict within it, with some people saying, get it all out now, and others saying, let's try to retain it and keep Trump from being hurt too much. Okay. One of the other things that show, on to story 2, the House Oversight Committee, the Republican-led committee, has issued a dozen subpoenas for files and information, first related to Epstein. Give us all your motherload of all this stuff, 300 gigabytes, 1.5 million pages, or if there's a lot of pictures, less, but I mean, a huge, many boxes equivalent of information. Give it all to us. Moreover, here's 10 subpoenas we would like to do. And take a step back and realize we're talking about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and the possibility of who's involved in it, and certain names bandied about, including that of the president. Here's whom they subpoena: Merrick Garland, William Barr, Jeff Sessions, Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder, Alberto Gonzales. So these are all former AGs, James Comey, Robert Mueller III, Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton, with the exception of Bill Clinton, who, shows up in some pictures, etc. Those are figures who have nothing to do with the, Epstein situation that people are clamoring to understand, his whole kind of not just criminal operation, but his many broad victimizations of underage girls. So this is obviously designed to be some kind of weird fishing expedition. Is wrong. It's really a hunt for Democratic big game to try to change the subject, and make it seem like what? Any Epstein cover-up or scandal? It's all about Merrick Garland and Loretta Lynch and Hillary Clinton. So total fabulous, contrived crap from the Oversight Committee. Now, normally, we've learned in the last few years, Oversight Committee, their subpoenas should be respected, but they're typically not, and people turn up their noses. Now, but then the Oversight Committee can refer charges to the DOJ on contempt. And of course, who's DOJ? Pam Bondi's DOJ, same DOJ that just yesterday convened a grand jury to investigate Barack Obama, as well as Brennan, Clapper, and Comey on a total manufactured story by none other than Tulsi Gabbard. So in other words, normally you would think this goes nowhere, but if there's all kinds of sort of conspiracy by the people who very, very, very unfortunately control the legal levers now to, order they show up and refuse this and that, and they say, well, we can't do it, and they refer to DOJ for contempt, and DOJ says, love it. USA versus fill in the blank, Garland, Lynch, etc. So, that's that's the acrid smell in the atmosphere when something like this happens from the House Oversight Committee. So we'll see what happens. Normally this would be feckless and posturing, not in Pam Bondi's Department of Justice. Okay, and that's the final thing is just the follow through. Again, a total empty gesture meant to divert attention. The DOJ has moved two different judges, Judge Berman and Judge Engelmeyer. Engelmeyer having inherited the Maxwell case from Ali Nathan, who was elevated to the Second Circuit, and Berman the Epstein case. They moved them for release of grand jury files, 5 days of grand jury. They're saying things like something new, which is a lot of this information came out at trial anyway. Release that. That's not one of the listed exceptions on when you release grand jury material. Both Berman and Engelmeyer have to date indicated that they're going by the book. The book lists, this is Congress's grand jury rule 6E statement of when you can release. And it's not because there's, political interest, much less it'll help the political fortunes of the sitting president. Now, there are, at least in New York, not in Florida, where a similar motion came up based on Epstein's first very sort of slap on the wrist prosecution. There's the possibility that Berman or Engelmeyer could say, but I'm going to give another reason and public interest will count. But A, I don't see them doing other reason, and B, I don't see them saying public interest would count. If it would, you would basically be doing away with grand jury, prohibition on release of grand jury material in every high-profile case. So I don't think that's going anywhere. It doesn't matter. None of the information has anything to do with the possibly scandalous and huge files that everyone wants to see. And it's just a diversion tactic that I think is going nowhere to date. And, they'll be able to say, if Berman and Engelmeyer is expected to say, sorry, that's no reason to release grand jury materials. They may have in mind saying, oh, look how hard we tried. I want full transparency, etc. But, that's a total kind of deception. I don't think it's going to play. It hasn't so far, but really it's a sideshow at this point. So the two non-sideshows are, one, will the White House, of course should be Department of Justice, right? But they're connected at the hip, feel forced to release the Blanche Maxwell conversation. And what's going to happen with the House oversight subpoena, given the prospect of just politically, a political conspiracy to hail the biggest names in the Democratic, in the previous administrations, on charges of contempt for not listening to subpoenas from the committee, the very thing, of course, that Republican after Republican after Republican has been doing for years. And in very few exceptions have they had to face consequences, because you had a fair and law-abiding Department of Justice under Merrick Garland saying, well, they referred Mark Meadows, but, I don't think that cuts it by our normal standards. There are no longer any normal standards. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.